Japanese people, 3.6% obesity, 126 million Japanese crammed into a landmass 18,000 square miles smaller than California. And so California has like 40 million people, Japan 126 million people, same landmass. And you have over 20,000 deaths in California and under 2,000 deaths in Japan. It's so obvious that it's an obesity hyperglycemia situation. It's so obvious. And as we mentioned before, it's been known since 1918 that this is an issue, and they never talk about it.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance and Healing Yourself. I'm your host, Dunnigan Kaiser.
And I'm Melody Kaiser.
We have our guest with us today. Dr. David Seaman is the author of the DeFlame Diet and this newest book, Deflame Your Immune System. He's joining us this Wednesday, October 28th, 2020. David, Dr. Seaman, thanks for joining us on the show.
Dave is just fine. No problem. Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you back. It's been a long time, longer than we believed. It's been like over a year since we had you on our channel. And you wrote this new book and specifically brought out how inflammatory effects of our diet and of our weight levels and our whether people are hyperglycemic, that sort of thing, high blood sugar, can affect our susceptibility to illness, and particularly in the season of COVID-19, the coronavirus, how that might make us more susceptible to, and how long it lasts, and how much spreading of it, how potential much of a carrier we might be. So if you could help to level set with us, starting out with just very briefly how our diet can affect our immune system in general.
Well, there are a couple of ways. If the average healthy person who is lean and active wants to flame up their body in general, which would include the immune system, eat a lot of French fries, because the omega-6 fatty acids flame up everything. And so it's been known forever. So I'm trying to think how far back the term immunonutrition emerged, but there are papers that are going back 20 years plus ago, and heavy-duty omega-6 fatty acids will flame us up. Now, that person is not likely to end up dying from COVID-19 or the flu. It would be much more likely the person to be obese and hyperglycemic. And this has been known for over 100 years, 102 years. Scientists first recognized that obese people did very, very poorly with the Spanish flu 100 years ago. So you would think that information would have been propagated forward, right? So I was born in 1960, and there was the Hong Kong flu that came to America from 57 to 1960, and they found that people who were obese and hyperglycemic did very, very poorly compared to lean, healthy people. And they found that out again in the late 60s when I think they called it the Asian flu. And then when H1N1, the swine flu, rolled through in 2009, and again, because everything is more modernized and there's a lot of research, and they found out once again that obese people who were hyperglycemic fared far more poorly than those who were lean and healthy. So you would think that from 2010, where they really hyped up swine flu, we're all going to die, and then till now, when Bill Gates is running around warning us about the virus that we're not prepared for, we're not prepared because 42% of the adult population in America is obese, and 25% of the adult population is hyperglycemic. That's why we're not prepared. It's ridiculous that some little novel virus will come along and wipe out an entire community of people, only if we are pre-flamed and that we're not able to tolerate its presence, which means our immune system would overreact and do us in. So we should be warned about virus and obesity and hyperglycemia the entirety of my lifetime, which is 60 years now. 63 years ago, they knew obesity and hyperglycemia is very bad for viral infections. I didn't know that until COVID came along. Mm-hmm. I'm into this area of research, but I don't really think about viral infections because, the flu comes along, people, usually it takes out old people, sometimes younger people, but it's never turned into this massive, massive, massive thing like COVID was. And then when I forget how it was I first looked at it, but it was before the obesity stuff started to appear in the newspapers. So it was like literally in February and March, I started looking like, obese people don't do well. So I started searching through the scientific databases, and that was when I came across the H1N1 article that was published back in 2011. And it said that if you're hyperglycemic, this is an example of it, if you're hyperglycemic, what it does is it inhibits white blood cells from clearing viruses from the system. So that was 11 years ago. Again, how people are hearing about it in our little talk, as opposed to it being on every news channel, and then the White House press rooms and all the rest of every state that does their thing, as opposed to saying, well, if you die in hospice, because if you go to hospice to die and then you happen to test positive, we call it a COVID death. Really? That's what you're going to talk about, as opposed to lose weight, get your blood glucose normal? I mean, it's shocking, the misinformation that's been put out there. Terrible. Yeah.
I wanted to get in a little bit now about kind of what we're made of. And I think people don't really understand that part of us is that the human virome you talked about and the microbiome in your book. Can you elaborate on those two things for us?
So everyone knows that we've got bacteria everywhere in our bodies. Pretty much our skin has it, our membranes, nose, mouth, all of our elimination orifices, they all have bacteria. There's about a 1-to-1 relationship in total bacterial cells and human cells, but there's about 100 times more. I can't say if specifically viruses or viral fragments or viral remnants, but it's about 100 times more viral fragments, viral essences in our body than there are human cells in our body. And most of those viruses, they infect our bacteria, which controls the virulence of our bacteria. So we need our bacteria, and we need our viral component as well. And so you can talk about any virus you can think of, like coronaviruses. People think, I never heard of that before. Well, scientists have known for a long time that coronaviruses occupy part of our respiratory system. So they make up part of our almost 8% of our genetic apparatus is viral in nature. Which means we should be adapted to the presence of new viruses and not fall apart, unless it's literally like Motaba from Outbreak. Remember that movie with Dustin Hoffman, Rene Russo? This monkey gets infected, it comes over and it spits in the guy's eye, and then the next thing you know, 2 days later he's dead, right? Seizing and pussing and flaming, and so Rene Russo's character, like a little slight cut in her hazmat suit, and the next day she's ready to die. Now, viruses don't exist like that in nature. If they did, we would have seen massive deaths all over the place. So our body is adapted to dealing with bacteria. Now, a really good way to look at it, and I don't know if it works like this for viruses, but most people have strep bacteria in their oropharynx. Well, why don't we always have strep throat? The reason why is because we live in a symbiotic relationship with our bacteria. When that symbiotic relationship changes, well, then the bacteria can proliferate. And what causes them to proliferate are stressful events. And stressful events means inflammatory events. So think about how people catch cold, right? I mean, what a dumb thing anyway. Don't catch a cold, right? So we go outside and it's freezing, and the sun, we're changing back the clock soon, right? We're changing them back. Right?
Yeah, this weekend, yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be darker now. We'll get a seasonal affective disorder for some people, less exercise, less vitamin D, more eating. Life is kind of, when the sun's gone, it's dark at 4:30, 5 o'clock. This is terrible. Got to wait for 5 months. So people tend to gain weight during that time period. It gets cold. If you go outside, you can certainly feel a chill. Well, I mean, does it make any sense that streptococci viruses are hanging out in some part of your yard? It's ridiculous. They're in us. So if you're sleeping less vitamin D, less exercise, overeating, stressed by the socio-political scenario that we are currently in, if the stress is enough to flame us up enough, that flame up creates an imbalance such that we no longer can have, for some people, depending on who you are, a proper symbiotic relationship. And now you've got strep throat, which means the stressors allow for your strep bacteria to proliferate.
Okay.
So it's not like someone coughs and, my God, you've just been bathed in all these bacteria. Well, we all have similar bacteria. So that's not going to be it. It's the fact that you stressed yourself out. You didn't sleep enough. I mean, think about college final exam week, right? The winter final exam week, studying, cramming, coffee up all night, not sleeping. Oh my God, Christmas is coming, whatever's coming. Everyone's stressing and you get sick. You feel run down. Well, of course, you didn't sleep. You ate like crap. You didn't exercise. It's dark out, no vitamin D. You're busy worrying. And of course, you're going to feel sick. And of course, you can have this imbalance will occur with your normal bacterial flora. So I think the same thing happens with viruses to some degree, because we already have coronaviruses in us. Why should a new one destroy us? Unless we are so flamed up that an additional novel virus, and the way, we can talk about the way the corona, it's called SARS-CoV-2. It gets into cells via a specific protein that, if it gets sugar-coated, it facilitates entry into lung cells. So if you're obese, your body is already in a viral infection state. Now what that means is, so you have small little fat cells normally, and then they swell and they get cramped together, and this cramming together of this, it creates a low oxygen state. It's called hypoxia, which is inflammatory. And then the fat cells that are all cramped together, they don't go through the normal cell cycling, so they go through a necrotic process. And this necrotic process draws in the immune system. The same cells that are involved in viral infections move into obese body fat. And so when people are obese and they finally hit the threshold of flame for obesity, they live in a chronic low-grade viral infection state all the time. So corona comes along, SARS-CoV-2 comes along. So if it's novel, it'll jack up immune function, but the immune system for these people is already jacked up. So they're more likely to have a really terrible outcome. And you can see a 12-year-old girl recently in Jacksonville, Florida, all locked down. Father would come home, wash his shoes, take a shower, wash the clothes. They wear a mask if they went out. They didn't go to school. Everything was virtual. This 12-year-old obese child died. It's horrific, horrific. What does anyone do who's stressed out? They eat. That's what they do. So they stay home and they eat more. And I don't know but it's very obvious she was morbidly obese as a 12-year-old. And it's catastrophic. And the only thing the family says, like, everyone should wear a mask. If I was that family, I'd be like suing people, because they should have been told, if your child is obese or if you're obese, you went to lockdown, you better lose weight and get your glucose normal, because if this sucker hits you, it could kill you, which is what it does. Right. So if you have this obesity state where your viral infection immune system activity is already heightened just because you're infected with excess body fat, and now you have high blood glucose. So it's like hemoglobin A1C is the name of a blood test that you can do to identify how high your glucose is over 120 days. So hemoglobin is a protein in red cells. So that becomes sugar-coated, and that's for people who it's called A1C. You should be below 5.7. It starts to tick above that, and it goes real high if you're diabetic. So a protein on lung cell membranes becomes sugar-coated. It's called ACE2. It's an enzyme. It's a protein. It becomes sugar-coated, and that allows for a much more robust entry of SARS-CoV-2 into lung cells. And that's how obese, hyperglycemic people can get screwed by this thing. And for whatever reason, all they're hearing is, well, it's a comorbidity. It's not a comorbidity. It creates the perfect fertile environment to basically die from this thing if you're obese and hyperglycemic.
Right. And I know in your book, you mentioned how the Japanese have actually done a lot better than we Americans. And I think you mentioned the statistic, 42% of Americans are obese and only 3.6% of Japanese are obese, and they've done a lot better. Maybe you can talk to us about that, because I think that really proves your hypothesis here of the, and it's not a hypothesis, but the actual, thank you, correlation between obesity and death from COVID.
Yeah, the interesting thing is whenever there's actually a New York Times newspaper article on how the Japanese population has done so well. Now, the Japanese population, they've worn masks for generations. It's nothing new. So if you're 80 years old, you've been wearing a mask probably for 50 years longer than someone who's 20 years old or 30 years old, right? So masks are not the answer. So if masks were the answer, then how come people in Japan who are dying are mostly over 80 years of age? The reason why is because once you cross 80, you're looking, I mean, I'm 60 now, so I figure I got 10 to 30 years left. Not being negative, it's just being, accurate. So the average death age in America, women are a little bit older, obviously, than men, but it's not that far, but it's under 80. So if you pass 80, you're like lucky. But if you're past 80, you should realize, okay, you take stock of where you are. Am I sick or am I healthy? If you're healthy, odds are you're not going to be affected. Because a lot of 8-year-olds who have been infected and maybe felt lousy for a week, didn't die, didn't get hospitalized. You got to be a flamer, 80 years of age, or just be an outlier person. So the Times article was, maybe the secret to Japan's success is right in front of their face. And they got everyone's masked up. So look at that picture, and what you see are 10 skinny Japanese people. Yeah, skinny Japanese people. 3.6% obesity. 126 million Japanese crammed into a landmass 18,000 square miles smaller than California. And so California has like 40 million people, Japan 126 million people, same landmass. And you have over 20,000 deaths in California and under 2,000 deaths in Japan. It's so obvious that it's an obesity hyperglycemia situation. It's so obvious. And as we mentioned before, it's been known since 1918 that this is an issue, and they never talk about it.
So far you've been talking about how people who are obese or who have hyperglycemia are at greater risk because they're already in an inflamed state. But it goes more than them being personally at a greater risk. You talked about the length of the time that they take to get over the disease and the amount of viral shedding that they do as spreaders of the disease.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because if you look at what we've been treated to in the news, we've been treated to the real problem of the COVID spreaders are these young, healthy people.
The asymptomatic carriers.
The asymptomatic carriers, right? Watch out for those young, healthy people. They're the problem. And so these young, healthy people are all freaked out now, thinking they're spreading it. They feel fine. I must be like, typhoid Mary,
yeah.
COVID Mary, right?
I even saw a photo on an article about that shows a young, fit woman running in the park, and there's an old gentleman sitting over on the park bench, well more than 6 feet from her, and they show this cartoon added cloud, this photoshopped cloud coming from her, as though it's going to go kill him because she ran by.
Yeah, well, but doesn't that fly in the face of what Dr. Kirkhoff from the World Health Organization said on June 8th? She said, we've done detailed contact tracing in association with other countries, what would have been CDC basically. And they found that when they go right back to the source, it's very rare to be an asymptomatic person. And then the next day, then June 9th, they came out with they pulled back and they said, well, 16 to 40% based upon our modeling. Now, she was talking about doing contact tracing and looking for sure if asymptomatic, and she says she goes, we're just not seeing it. So that's a big problem, because we were locked down because we were told that the young healthy people running are spreading it, right? And they're going to get all the rest of us infected. And so the fact that she said very rare on June 8th and more common on June 9th, here's what they actually, very rare means about 1 in 10,000. 1 in 10,000. 40% is 4,000 out of 10,000. No scientist worth their salt would be off by a factor of 4,000. So that there's something fishy going on here with the way this thing is being pushed. And if you look at the whole economic changes that were taking place starting at the end of, because the whole repo market, all the stuff that your other guests talk about far better than I, that all seems to be active, particularly when, like, from June or January of this year until like February, the Fed, bought up like $3 trillion worth of who knows what they bought up, right? Now, how come no one knows about that? Well, because, that wouldn't help.
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't help the Davos big reset that they're waiting to do, as far as I can tell. So you got to keep people afraid. And if you keep them afraid, then they'll be confused. And then they actually will not know what they should do for their own health. It's like, what can I do for me? So if you look at like the debates now with Trump and Biden, Biden's like, he's failed us, and we need to keep the country safe. Government can't keep you safe from a virus that attacks obese people. How do you do that? So it's the average person who should do this. So when one is obese and when one is infected, the immune chemistry that manifests is such that there's less of a type of it's called interferon. It's a type of chemical that allows the immune system to tag and eliminate viruses. Well, this type 1 interferon is produced significantly less in the obese body, which means the obese body is unable to effectively mount an elimination strategy for the virus. So that allows for a greater proliferation and shedding, which is essentially proliferation and release of the virus, 100% longer than lean, healthy people. Okay. So the obese body is more prone to bacterial and viral infections because they live in a low-grade infection state because of the obese body chemistry. Once they get infected, they stay infected longer. The obese body also creates, because everyone has heard of the virus has mutated. Right. We live in fear. The virus has mutated, right? So who is the virus mutating in? That healthy runner? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the guy surfing at Malibu. He's the mutator. Not likely. The obese body is that which creates mutations more readily that are much more virulent. So they shed more of them. And then once you cross a certain level of obesity, you'll recognize, so for example, when I play golf, I walk. And I don't huff and puff unless it's like 100 degrees out there. Then, but if it's okay, just walking along, no problem. But I play golf with 80-year-old guys who are obese and just have the golf cart walking 50 yards, they're like huffing and puffing, right? So there's a certain point when the obesity hits a level where you breathe more heavily. Heavy breathing releases more viruses. So that same body now, there's literally the super spreader body, stays infected longer, mutations, more virulent, spreading it. These people are also less responsive to a vaccine. So think about vaccine that we're all hearing about now. Bill Gates is going to come in. Trump's going to send out the military with the vaccine to save us all, right? From obesity and hyperglycemia. So I trace back as early as 1985, scientists found that the obese population responds less effectively to vaccines than the lean population. So this is like completely out of the mainstream, other than saying that obese people it's a comorbidity, it puts them at greater risk. So with that in mind, all of those obesity factors, the fact that obese people are more likely to be infected, that's bacterial infections and viral infections. They stay infected longer because their immune system is compromised. They get more mutations. And so they also breathe heavily once they reach a certain threshold, and they respond less effectively to vaccines. How is it that people have to hear about this on a YouTube channel as opposed to on all mainstream news outlets? I think the reason why is, think about this. Let's just say that the entire population heard this, our little chat, and they all buying soda, donuts, all the stuff we know is terrible. 60% of the calories consumed by Americans, sugar, flour, refined oils. So if everybody decided to get healthy tomorrow, there'd be an economic collapse just due to eating less sugar and flour. And if we stopped eating sugar and flour and got healthy, then we wouldn't need the other white powders that people live on called drugs. So Goldman Sachs came out with a report. It was a biotech kind of comment. It was like, well, we question based upon business if getting healthy, effective healthy measures are actually good for business. So there's multiple reasons why we don't hear this kind of stuff. Yeah, because it would change behavior properly. So what if you had a 12-year-old girl who was obese, and you heard that obese hyperglycemics are likely to die? You'd probably have her stay home, walk a lot, walk around the yard, and the entire family will go on to a healthy regime to lose weight and become less hyperglycemic. Well, unfortunately, there was a 12-year-old girl who died, a morbidly obese 12-year-old girl who died in Middle Florida. And this was 6 months after lockdown. She could have been shredded, healthy, and made more resilient when she was infected. The other thing happened. All parents could say, and amidst their tears, was everyone needs to wear masks. Masks are not going to save you from obese, hyperglycemic body chemistry that is a viral infection and facilitates a greater degree of viral infection.
The other thing that we've been reading about is how vitamin D deficiency also really doesn't help even the average person heal, or that we're more vulnerable to catching the disease if we have, a vitamin D deficiency.
It's
so you want to talk to that?
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting when they talk, like you'll see it in the news, it'll be like, it does help or it doesn't help, back and forth. Everyone's like, does it help or not? I'm confused about stuff. It's kind of like butter or margarine, like everyone's freaked out because the information is always sort of contradictory. Vitamin D deficiency, it affects the immune system. And one of the studies that has shown that depending upon your vitamin D level, it correlates with how hospitalization or severity would be if you do get hospitalized. I forget the exact details. So the problem with news bits like that is it doesn't paint the proper picture. So if you're obese, which is what 42% of the adult population is, people who are obese, they have lower levels of vitamin D anyway because it's fat soluble. So you already have the obese body chemistry that's viral infection-like. Hyperglycemia inhibits the immune system from clearing bacterial and viral infected cells. And then a vitamin D deficiency on top of that augments the viral infection immune change that occurs with obesity. A nightmare. So now you get infected and says, what should I take? Vitamin D, it might help you. The message should be, get your blood glucose proper, get your baseline down, get your vitamin D levels up. That'll give you a great chance. And of course, take vitamin C and zinc, which are anti-inflammatory. And part of the problem with the way immune cells get rid of infected cells, that the ability to gobble them up is inhibited if you have too much free radical activity. And when you're obese and hyperglycemic, free radical activity is through the roof. So you want to lose weight, get your glucose normal, get your vitamin D levels normal, take vitamin C and zinc and probably other botanicals like ginger and turmeric, and avoid stressors as much as you can. And that was what we've been told when we were all locked down in March, as opposed to increasing. I mean, it's just amazing. Going to lockdown, what happens? Porn view goes up massively, alcohol drinking goes up massively, depression massively, and body accumulation goes up massively. Exactly what you need to viral infection worse.
Yeah.
So it's just horrific.
Yeah, and I think some people are realizing too that the lockdowns, I think organizations still are saying that they work. More people are saying, they don't work because it does add that stressor. People get stressed, they become abusive, which they normally maybe not. And then you have suicide rates have gone up. Yeah. So we're really hurting our population.
Yeah, the economic impacts.
And
I think it was even the World Health Organization just recently came out and said, that should not be the primary tool for managing this.
No.
Yeah, it's horrific. Japan had, because it was such a massive international fear, they did a lockdown deal. It was eliminated rapidly. And they're walking around with their masks on, but they're thin anyway, so it's not a problem. Only the very old people are over 80, 85, whatever it might, because they're frail anyway. So the Japanese model, which is basically not a model, it's just simply we should weigh what we weigh. So let's just say we still occasionally do this, right? We should just look like versions of our current selves, right? Be less like huge, Stay Puft Marshmallow Men creatures from Ghostbusters. We need to look like we are now, and then we'll have a much better chance of not dying from a novel virus, and also not dying from cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. Because it's interesting. Think about this: obesity, hyperglycemia, vitamin D deficiency is the ticket to die from everything, just a viral infection.
In your book, you also described how improving our gut health can improve our immune function. I mean, some people aren't aware that I think the surface area through which we contact the outside world is actually bigger inside us than it is outside of us. But can you talk to us about why gut health is key and critical to immune health?
We have the same amount of bacteria in our body as human cells in our body. I don't know how many trillions that is, but the majority are in our gut. It's just, the average bowel movement is like half bacteria. I mean, it's shocking. You're right, it's unbelievable. That much. So our diet, if you have a diet that is rich in sugar, flour, and refined oils, that changes the character of our gut bacteria, and it facilitates the absorption of certain bacterial components. It's called lipopolysaccharide. It's part of the cell wall of certain bacteria, and it's also endotoxin. And so what they find is that, back to the obesity issue, obese people, because they pig out on sugar, flour, refined oils, they have a whole lot more endotoxin in circulation. Now, even if you take the three of us at our most healthy, robust state, and we'll just sneak out to the donut shop, 6 donuts each, right? Just do it, right? That'll be like, I don't know, 1,500 calories of sugar, flour, and oil. So 1 hour later, if we were to do a blood test before we ate the donuts and afterwards, our endotoxin levels would be elevated. Yeah, so we get this acute elevation of endotoxin. Now, what endotoxin does is it activates the immune system to jack up inflammation. So if you're obese and you've got fat cells that are flamed up and large and like there was like an infection state with calories, the immune system's going crazy. At a low grade, we got vitamin D deficiency, we're hyperglycemic, and now we get endotoxin. You see, the immune system is just all jacked up. Now you get this novel virus that hits. And if you have the big trifecta, what's that military called when you have all the, you're in a nasty spot where you're gonna be hit by snipers from everywhere. You basically just create your own sniper's nest all around you. You sniper yourself. And you hit with that new virus, and you have multiple inflammatory factors elevating you, so that now you might be one of those people who develops what's called a cytokine storm. Cytokines are proteins that are inflammatory, and that's what kills people in the hospital. It's called a cytokine storm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
awful. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So the other aspect, really losing weight is one of your big things, and being on a really healthy diet, which is important for all of us. But there are also some supplements that can help deflame the immune system. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the popular ones are zinc and vitamin C, and vitamin D. They are all legitimate, but they need to be in the right context. If I'm an obese, hyperglycemic person, and I've got endotoxin through the roof, the odds that vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc will be really helpful to me, it goes down the worse our glycemia and obesity is. So all these things need to work together to create a body that is more resilient to new stressors, like a novel virus. So what vitamin C and zinc do is they're antioxidants, which means they inhibit what are called free radicals. So what free radicals do when they're produced in excess in immune cells is they inhibit the immune cell's ability to gobble up virally infected cells, and that means that the virus can proliferate. So that is the way you want to look at those supplements, and there's nothing special. It's not like how much should you take? No one really knows for sure. Probably 1, 2, 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C is probably adequate, and probably 30 milligrams of zinc appears to be adequate. Vitamin D is variable depending upon what your vitamin D level is, but the average person, unless they have a rare hypercalcemic state, can handle 4,000, 10,000 IUs per day. But it's always good to test first. Those things can be helpful, but they shouldn't be relied upon in the absence of neglecting obesity, hyperglycemia, because those two things, they create a disaster if one's infected by a virus. And I keep emphasizing that, and I get criticized for being like a fat hating, fat shamer type person, as opposed to, no, it's actually the opposite. I would like to see people not die and suffer.
Yeah,
right?
You don't want them being injured through neglect. And that's the shocking malpractice or neglect, dereliction of duty on the part of our leading, whether it's a Surgeon General, whether it's the head of the CDC or whoever, is like, we need to be hearing what it is we need to know, not only so that we can keep more people healthy and safe from harm, but also so that the rest of us can have a life and can we can take care of our economic lives and have our freedoms back, instead of just having this inappropriate and ineffective approaches to excessive lockdowns and that sort of thing that are missing the main point.
Yeah, it really is. You said it right. It's a dereliction of duty. It really is horrific.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've been speaking with Dr. David Seaman. He is the author of Deflame Your Immune System, and you can get this anywhere books are sold. But if they want to find out more about your work, Dr. Seaman, where can people find out you?
Right, to DeFlame.com, and from there you can click on to the YouTube channel, and I got like probably 15 videos that discuss all of this information in detail. I have pictures that show how the viruses enter, show how too much to say now, but lots of information there, and also Facebook is there, and then information and blog. I've got a blog also there that they can find out more information as well.
All that starts at deflame.com.
That's it, deflame.com.
All right.
Great.
Well,
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us here again on Liberty and Finance and Healing Yourself.
Thanks for having me.
To acquire gold and silver, just go to libertyandfinance.com. When the main site comes up, click on Bullion Sales. That's libertyandfinance.com, Bullion Sales. You'll see my name, Donegan Kaiser, my phone number, and my associate, Kaiser Johnson, his phone number, our email, libertyandfinance@protonmail.com.